Hello, everyone. This is Eva Nolik-Smith with YogaUOnline, and I'm very pleased to be here today with Dr. Ginger Garner, a physical therapist and founder of the Professional Yoga Therapy Institute. Ginger is a doctor of physical therapy as well as a yoga therapist, and she's the author of Medical Therapeutic Yoga, a leading book on yoga-based physical therapy, which is one of the leading books that integrates key principles from Western anatomy and kinesiology with the practice and therapeutic uses of yoga. Ginger has worked for more than 20 years as an integrative physical therapist, bridging medical science with what has now become known as lifestyle medicine, which includes the use of yoga, Pilates, mindfulness, music, meditation, and other lifestyle measures as health promotion and intervention. And Ginger, one of the things that's really unique about you is that you are also very socially conscious and active. And I think you are one of the few health providers that really realize that equality is at the heart of resolving issues relating to population and public health. And among Ginger's many other talents, she is also a singer and a mom. And she lives in North Carolina with her husband, 3 sons, and their rescue pup, Scout. So welcome, Ginger. So glad to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Eva. I'm really glad to be here, and I'm really looking forward to talking about this topic.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. So we're here to talk about the many uses of yoga in what has become known in modern terms as lifestyle medicine. And I think one of the most interesting things about that topic is that it really takes the concept of prevention to a whole new level. Because we're used to saying like prevention is worth a pound of cure. But we now know that healthy habits, healthy lifestyle does a lot more than preventing disease.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's foundational components to lifestyle medicine that essentially overlap with some of the ancient systems of medicine. And I'm just happy to see lifestyle medicine as a profession in the medical world come to the forefront and begin to embrace some of these things that we've inherently known to be helpful, and now that science is supporting is incredibly helpful, but also evolving what we had practiced in the past and moving towards kind of integrative medicine 2.0, if you will.
Yeah, very good point. And I think one of the things, the ways that gets expressed that I find particularly fascinating is that we can actually not just stay healthy, we can dial back our biological age and be younger than our chronological age. Yeah. Talk about that.
Sure. So there are distinct mechanisms by which we can figure out or determine in the field of lifestyle someone's ages, biological versus chronological age. So what I do when someone comes in is I use screening and a program that helps calculate 2 different ages, their fitness age and their cardiovascular age, separate from their chronological age. And the way that's determined is through, like I mentioned, screening and an algorithm. And we know that physical activity is a top risk factor for non-communicable diseases. And I'll just call them NCDs for the rest of our time together. And that includes things like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, metabolic disorders, obesity, osteoarthritis, musculoskeletal conditions, and several cancers. And the other big part of that is nutrition. So by looking at those elements and vitals, so I'll do body mass index, blood pressure, heart rate, respiratory rate, you can screen someone and determine what their biological age is. And the two ages that I look at are a cardiovascular and a fitness age.
Interesting. And so what do you find in terms of, for a healthy person who is super healthy lifestyle, really fit,
Yeah.
how does it relate to their chronological age and vice versa, someone who is not so fit? What kind of difference do you often see?
Right. Well, I can use several cases as an example. I try out to always, obviously, as healthcare providers, we want to be practicing what we preach when we're working with patients, when we're working with clients, or if I'm teaching a larger group class, when I'm working with students in a class. So I track my own biological and chronological ages. And you can actually, in the program that I use, you can tweak that by making improvements. So let's just say my initial assessment, I'm 46 years old, and my initial assessment came out with something like 32-year-old cardiovascular age. And I'm thinking, well, that's pretty good, but can I improve it, right? I mean, as a human being, our nature is to want to see if we can make it better. So if I tweak my physical activity commitment, if I improve my leafy green consumption, if I make sure I remain in a good, with good body mass index, and my resting heart rate improves because I know I'm going out and getting that aerobic activity, then I see that biological cardiovascular age and my fitness age go down. In contrast, so that's a pretty big shift from being 46 years old but having the cardiovascular age of a 30-year-old. Right. I'm going to keep seeing if I can improve on that. But let's take another individual that I had who I think some of the main pieces of what was missing for him, he's 55 years old, is physical activity and a pretty poor nutritional screen with a pretty sedentary lifestyle. And the other thing that gets computed into the algorithm is how much we sit every day. And for his job, he doesn't really have a choice. Maybe a sit-to-stand desk, and I'm using my sit-to-stand desk now, that can help. And everyone has probably heard, sitting is the new obesity. Whether or not that's truly true, we don't really know that, but it does make a difference. It makes us all kind of squirm a little and go, oh, I think I'll go take a 10-minute walk during lunch. But the motivator for that is if their blood pressure comes down, their vitals basically come down, and I counsel them on upticking that physical activity that's congruent with maybe what their back pain issue is that they came to me with, or their knee pain, they'll actually see, they'll see that biological age go down, and that's pretty motivating for people.
Yeah, that's great. Well, the interesting corollary of it is that you actually look like a 32-year-old. There's a lot of benefits also in terms of saving on weight.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I think that, following all of those foundations of lifestyle medicine, it can't hurt. It can't hurt. Yeah. And there are other environmental influences as well, the amount of time we spend in the sunlight, which is good to a point, for vitamin D, how we're exposed to environmental toxins or pollutants that may be in our food, in our water, in our soil. And so that drives me to be kind of an environmentalist physical therapist and practitioner as well, because I know that if I am what I eat, then what's in the dirt, what's in the water, what's in the air, what's the sustainability, measure of our planet, which we know we can do better.
Yeah, and I think on a personal level, the implications are just staggering when you look at the statistics of chronic disease and people over the age of 65 who have chronic disease, which are those diseases that you mentioned before: cardiovascular disease, to some degree cancer, high blood pressure, arthritis, back pain, all of those things that modern medicine really does not have a cure for, so they're chronic. And I think, I forget exactly what it is, but I believe it's something like 80% of people over the age of 65 have at least one chronic disease. And I think something like 60% have two or more, which is staggering.
Yeah, it really is. It's something, it makes us all pay attention. Like, why is it important to pay attention to how well we age? Some people consider, well, if I lay on the couch all day and I decide to eat that bag of potato chips, I'm not hurting anyone but myself. But it becomes important to pay attention to it when we realize that the majority of geriatric people in their geriatric area of life are going to have two or more chronic diseases that were largely preventable.
Yeah.
And then that brings up a really important point. And it hits home to everybody, no matter who we are. I mean, in the US, we're spending more money per person on healthcare because of the chronic pain and the chronic epidemic disease that we have, but we're actually continuing to get sicker. Wow. So that raises a huge red flag and says, the way our healthcare system is operating is not working. We're paying more for it, but we continue to get sicker. We have more pain, more chronic disease. In the United States, the rates are pretty staggering. Over 80% of healthcare today is really concerned with lifestyle-related illnesses. And the latest stat that I saw was between 55 and 64, the ages of 55 to 64, over 70% have some kind of chronic disease. Wow. That's according to the CDC.
Yeah, yeah.
And 80% of chronic diseases, I think this is from the World Health Organization, 80% of chronic diseases like premature heart disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes, and some types of cancer, those are all preventable. So over the majority of the money we're spending and the majority of people suffering from these diseases, we can prevent those. And we can certainly treat them. It will just take more dedicated motivation to implementing, lifestyle medicine. Right. And, the reason it hits home, I think, for us is because if we think about it, and I'm not that far away from 50 now, the biggest concerns for people with chronic disease over the age of 50, so that's more than 70% of the population over age 50, are concerned with not being a burden to their family and their friends. They don't want to lose independence, and they're worried about paying for their health care. And there's not anybody, I think, that doesn't strike fear, into them for those reasons. Yeah. And I think everybody feels that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's really staggering. And I think one of the things a lot of people don't realize is that cancer also falls into this category, or many types of cancer. Mm-hmm. We all know that, cardiovascular disease, stroke, high blood pressure, things like that can be affected by how fit we are. There are specific things we can do. But I think fewer people realize that much of cancer risk is also tied to your fitness, your lifestyle habits.
Absolutely, it is.
Stress levels.
And that's a really good point to make. And I've worked, my primary thrust of what I do in therapy is work with people in pain. But I've also had several cancer patients as well. And it's always heartbreaking to me because I have to navigate this very carefully. When someone comes in, whether it's breast cancer or prostate cancer or a lymphoma, just off the top of my head of people that I've seen, the vast majority of the time, and some of these people are going to some of the best cancer centers in the US, which I won't name by name, but they're not giving them the information on, eating to beat cancer. In fact, one of the most prominent cancer centers in the United States, actually, the physician there actually told one of my patients, didn't matter what he ate. And yet his son, the patient's son said, Dad, you got to beat this. You have to eat like you're running a marathon or training for a marathon. That's how you need to eat, which means eating healthy. Don't eat that fast food at lunch anymore. It's not fueling your system. It's poisoning your system.
Yeah.
And, I'm sad to say that that patient didn't make it. And you never know how the impact of what a practitioner, a physician, a doctor, the impact that it has on the individual. Even someone with a really high level of health, literacy, they understand the healthcare system and they know what their rights are and they know what to ask for. If a doctor says to them, oh, it doesn't matter what you eat. Yeah, you can stay up half the night and it doesn't matter if you get sleep or not. Well, science says it does. Yeah. So I think there's still a chasm between what's being, practiced and preached out there in the healthcare system and what science is saying.
Right. Yeah, and I think the other part of it, because when you really, it's a very well-established fact that 80% of chronic diseases are preventable. And so it's kind of like a duh, why are we not doing anything about it? Mm-hmm. But I think one of the conceptual gaps that we have is there's not a distinction between clinical and subclinical issues. So we're all familiar with the clinical manifestations of disease, but one of the key factors of your work is you're saying there's a lot of subclinical signs of early stage problems, and that's what we need to pay attention to. Could you talk about that and some of the markers that might cue us in of where we are in terms of prognosis, longer term prognosis, so to speak?
Absolutely. I'll give you a couple of stories, a couple of cases. I had someone come in and I always ask about labs. So if your physical therapist is not asking about labs, for those of you who are listening, they should be. They should be, if they're up to date on what the science is. So I had someone come in. I asked them how their last labs look. So their diabetes screening, because I knew they were at high risk. And she said, labs, my nurse practitioner said, labs look good. I said, well, can I see them? So they all should be asking to see them. The PT shouldn't just be asking, are they okay? So when I pulled up those labs and looked at her diabetes panel, part of which is a hemoglobin A1C, which many of you may be familiar with who are listening, she was 0.1% away from being pre-diabetic. But the nurse practitioner said, looks fine, no problem. And I said to her, I said, did you know you're 0.1% away from being pre-diabetic? It turns out her mother had just passed away due to complications from diabetes not too long ago. So that absolutely, just gave her chills to see that her nurse practitioner said it was fine, did not ask her anything about any of the factors we know can immediately change your hemoglobin A1C. And so she wanted to do something about it and intervene. So how many times does that happen where they're waiting for a clinical diagnosis? And you know what? It may not be the nurse practitioner's fault. Maybe she's forced to see so many patients and the health system she works for says you're not allowed to spend any more time with a patient because we won't pay you as an insurance company, right? Until they have a full-blown diagnosis. So how many people get pushed through the system during their annual physicals because of that, right? And and it could be that they weren't paying attention to the labs, but I think a lot of times it is the broken system that we operate under does not allow healthcare providers to do the job that they were passionate about doing when they went to whatever medical school or training that they went through.
Yeah.
I had another case where if someone comes in to see me and they have back pain or pelvic pain or whatever it is, I need to know what their energy levels are like. How do you feel during the day? So I had someone else come in, and it turns out they were borderline anemic. But again, the practitioner has said, labs look fine, no problem. But when I looked at the labs, you need a kind of a three-dimensional portrait of the blood to be able to determine whether or not intervention is needed for anemia. Well, that's kind of like your 3D view. Well, they had only done one of those measures and said your hemoglobin looks fine, but they didn't check the other two critical measures that really gave you the three-dimensional picture. It's like taking an X-ray of one view and then saying everything looks fine, right? So from an orthopedic standpoint, we know that wouldn't be cool, just one film, and then your labs, you can't just do one to get that full picture. So it's important that we discern those subclinical levels of disease, and all of these NCDs lead to and stem from inflammation. It's been called a bunch of things, inflammaging, and obesity, diabesity, and I've also heard the term obesogens, and I'll get to that one in a second. But the primary factor in this premature aging that we see, which also means if you have cell death and the DNA is allowed to become kind of scrambled, and that can create a cancer situation, all of that stems from this concept of inflammaging.
So chronic inflammation.
Right, chronic, and it can be low level inflammation. So the other lab that is often not allowed to be measured by insurance companies unless people show clinical levels or big risk factors for heart disease is something called high sensitivity C-reactive protein. That's something that I think everyone really should have that measure done. That tells you how much inflammation you have in your bloodstream.
Interesting.
And I've had practitioners say, sorry, can't order it. They don't have enough risk factors for heart disease. However, having inflammation is a risk factor for people coming in to see me with pelvic pain or back pain. Yeah. Having inflammation is also a risk for developing clinical depression, not just cardiovascular disease. So there's a wide range of things that looking at these lab measures would really be able to tell us. So in the series, the full series that I'll be teaching, I'll go over some of those things that you can be empowered to be able to ask your provider, hey, what about this lab? What about this one? Right. And does this matter? And I think by doing that, we can change the system. If the system isn't going to change, then we can start creating that.
Yeah, consumers can be educated. And
Yeah.
And I think the way blood screening works is that it's really kind of like statistical extremes they're looking for.
Right.
And, again, clinical statistical extreme is one thing, another is subclinical, where there's like borderline things going on, and your chance of intervention is much higher there because you haven't had that phase transition into a full-blown disease, so the body can still correct it given the resources.
And that's another important point that reminded me to let everyone know that's listening is to make sure that you get copies of your labs. It sounds kind of mundane and too practical, but a lot of the labs now, which is a very good thing, they will give you the ranges. So if you're in the correct range, it'll be green. If you're moderate, and if you're low, obviously it will be in the red, but pay attention to those yellows in the middle, the cautions, because if your hemoglobin A1C is borderline and your practitioner didn't tell you, if you know about it, you can start intervening right away.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Now, we haven't even talked into the whole, I don't want to keep you too long, but there is a whole other dimension we haven't touched on, which is genetic versus epigenetics. The whole concept of our genetic material is not just like set in stone. That is also affected by our lifestyle. And so we can have biological family history for certain diseases, but that doesn't necessarily mean those diseases will manifest, like in the case of diabetes.
Yeah, absolutely. For those who aren't aware of what epigenetics are, epigenetics is the description of how genes are basically expressed. The field of epigenetics, or the impact of epigenetics, it doesn't mean that It's going to change our DNA inherently. But what it will do is flip switches on and off in how our DNA is expressed, which is positive. And the take-home message is we can do much more to offset our genes than the genes can do to offset us and our health. Even if we do get a bad rap sheet of genes, which is another thing that I look at as a lifestyle medicine practitioner, I can teach people to do so much more to offset that. Some of the epigenetic influences, just kind of give you a brief overview, is the way we're born. Vaginal birth is going to populate the gut microbiome more than C-sections. Well, C-sections don't at all. And so some caregivers are now actually swabbing the vagina and populating the gut microbiome of the infant by doing those swabs, which is actually proving to help. So the way you're born, it matters. The way you're fed between the ages of 0 and 3 matters. According to the literature, by the time you're 3, you pretty much have an adult, mature microbiome. What does that say? That says what we eat is just as important as early childhood education, right? So we could just kind of exhale on that for a second. Yeah. If we're already mature as an adult with a microbiome by the age of 3, then we better get on it between the ages of 0 and 3 to do everything we can to populate a healthy gut microbiome. Yeah. Now, I had my kids before, this is an example I'll give. I had my kids before the United States banned bisphenol A, BPA. But I had already read the science on BPA and knew that it was an endocrine disruptor. Those are chemicals and other man-made various materials that are introduced into the body system, and they interrupt endocrine function and produce multi-system effects. So I'd already read about some of those chemicals called endocrine disruptors, and I made sure to take those out of kind of my kids' circulation, right? So that meant I didn't use plastic bottles, and I breastfed for as long as I could, which is varying 10 to 15 months with all my kids. But I made sure that if somebody else was going to feed them that breast milk, that it was in stainless steel. Man, that was hard to find 15 years ago. Yeah. I had to order from all these obscure websites to find this stuff. Their little bath rubber toys, I made sure that those are BPA free because they're always noshing on them. Right. Canada had already banned things like bumper pads. However, the United States hadn't. But reading that science, I made sure we didn't even buy those bumper pads because it was increasing the risk of SIDS by trapping a layer of carbon dioxide in the crib with the newborn. Wow. So just little things like that that can, have, obviously the bumper, pad thing is not an epigenetic issue, but that's a death issue. And those are things that new parents have to be concerned about. But feeding between 0 to 3, method of birth, where we live, what we eat, obviously, endocrine disruptors, which can also include things like when the kids were older and they started to eat whole food, I made sure that and my kids weren't big fans of meat, so that wasn't a big issue, but let's just say the veggies, I made sure to source things like grass-fed beef when they got to that point, and clean poultry from a local farm. I stayed up on things like the Environmental Working Group, EWG.org. They have a dirty dozen and a clean 15 for fruits and veggies. I made their baby food from scratch. It's real easy in a food processor. Just steam it and blend it up. I eat some, they eat some, everybody's happy. I made sure that those fruits and veggies came off the clean 15 list. And if I couldn't get them, then I'd have to go and buy organic if they were dirty dozen on the dirty dozen list. Right. And that's an independent nonprofit organization that updates the list every year. Yeah. The same organization also lists top endocrine disruptors. So it's easy for a parent or an individual to go there, click on it, print out the endocrine disruptors. They even have some handy printouts you put in your wallet for the clean 15 and dirty dozen. That's an easy way to influence your epigenetic, your DNA expression right away. And then there's two other things. Even physical activity has an epigenetic effect, which is fantastic because that's available to any of us. And then finally is age. And we don't have to lose our telomere length. And that's just the status and health of our DNA. That doesn't have to experience what's called senescence or cell death. When those things shorten and kind of disintegrate, it opens up the DNA to mutation, which is the birth of cancer, essentially, and other issues. So we can protect ourselves epigenetically through all of those things. What we eat, physical activity. Fortunately, mindfulness and meditation can really combat and help maintain the telomere length, which is happy news.
I believe in studies also that yoga can help maintain the telomere length.
Yes, and I think the primary mechanism that's been identified is probably the mindfulness aspect, the meditation aspect of yoga. I think that we've probably got a lot of work to do to see exactly what the physical movement does. Since we've got a lot of recalibration of postures that need to be done just to make sure they're safe. But the other part of epigenetics is then genetics. What if we actually get handed a set of genes that's less than ideal? And an easy way to explain this is everybody has heard of antioxidants, right? Eat the rainbow, eat your antioxidants. And there's some genes called single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs. It's much easier to say a SNP, that impact the way the genes are expressed. They impact methylation. And one of the major drivers of methylation, and this is just picking one detail out of what we can do, is glutathione. So how do we get glutathione? Well, we eat sulfurous compounds of veggies like cabbages. So get out there and eat some Brussels sprouts and cabbages and sulfur compound vegetables. That actually boosts glutathione. There's other ways to do it too, through consumption of things like choline, which is actually in eggs. There's a big laundry list of things you can do to increase glutathione, which improves methylation, so that if you have some of those SNPs that I was talking about, which if you remember way back to your 10th grade biology class, the concept of homozygous versus heterozygous, which means if you got 2 bad genes from your parents, you got 2 pluses, so you got a homozygous situation. If you got 1 plus and 1 negative, you have a heterozygous situation. So when I see that and I ask if they've had genetic testing, and I can look at that, that's wonderful. If they haven't, it's a very inexpensive way to, it's like $69 or something when it's on sale, to basically look at the stratification of that data. You can easily see what some of those prominent SNPs are. So for example, some of the SNPs that would impact that methylation that I mentioned, that would lead to premature aging, not absorbing antioxidants. So what if someone is super healthy, they're doing it all right, they may not be absorbing it. Energy production and detoxification. So if we just take the last 2 and say, okay, liver detox and energy production, our basic ATP cycle, getting us out of bed in the morning and making the day good, they may not, if they have one of these SNPs, they may not be absorbing B12 or folate. And you can go for a while banking on youth, without doing any of this stuff. But sooner or later, we hit it's usually around 40, I think, we'll hit a wall. And I can share a little bit of a story about myself, actually. I'll be 47 in August. And a few years ago, my body just crashed unexpectedly. I had not done any genetic testing at that time because I was doing yoga. I was meditating. I was happy. I was managing stress. I was getting my physical activity in. I was eating really well. A little bit of a, nutrition police, making sure I had balance of all the colors and that kind of thing. So I had no idea that I had some of these SNPs, but I did. I didn't know it until, though, things started to disintegrate. My red blood cells started to collapse on themselves. I developed really strange and severe vitamin and mineral deficiencies, and yet I was actually eating the rainbow. I was plant-based. I was taking vitamin supplements. Wow. Turns out I wasn't actually absorbing them. I wasn't absorbing B12. I wasn't absorbing folate. I had a weird vitamin A deficiency. I was low in magnesium, calcium, and I turned out to develop severe anemia. It got very, very strange. Wow. And when you start to lose all of those minerals, you start to lose your cognitive function. And it was all genetic.
Wow. Wow.
So it can be profound. Now, fortunately, that's not very common for people, but for me, I knew I needed to get genetic testing. I knew I needed to get to a functional medicine provider who could help me get the labs, access the labs that I needed. Mm-hmm. And the sad thing was, insurance wasn't going to pay for some of those labs. Mm-hmm. So I actually had to kind of finance getting better to be able to afford what it took to buy the supplements that were already pre-methylated, since my body was not going to do that for me. And that's such an easy screen. So for around $70 to $90, you can actually screen that stuff. Look at it and say, I'm taking the wrong vitamin supplements. So sometimes it's very easy to intervene, and you can prevent like happening what happened to me. That really set me on a path to go, it's great to be doing all these things, all these components of lifestyle medicine, but if you're missing one variable, it can actually throw you into a clinical, issue, and very, very quickly.
Wow.
Very quickly.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, that's a wonderful story of, it's a whole other level of detective work that you can't just rely on your doctor to know and help you go through, because they haven't been trained at this. I mean, there's very few actual lifestyle medicine practitioners out there, and you happen to be one of them. And of course, one of the reasons we're having this talk is you're having a course on yoga and lifestyle medicine on YogaUOnline, where I think everyone listening in are like, okay, what are the markers? How can I get tested for them? What do I need to look for? How can yoga help in this particular situation? So tell us about the course and exactly what we'll be covering.
Okay. Well, what I would like to give in that course is the information that I would give to my family and my friends and the people that I work with clinically, is to say, here, the evidence base that supports lifestyle medicine is probably more powerful than any other evidence base that we have. And in the lifestyle medicine program that I teach, the number of citations alone that support the use of the variables that I'm about to share with you to combat pain and NCDs, there are hundreds and hundreds of peer-reviewed articles that support changing and addressing physical activity, nutrition, sleep, stress, that's a biggie, that goes along with emotional well-being, tobacco use, alcohol, how much is too much, and then things like body mass index and your basic vitals. Those are kind of the vital signs of lifestyle medicine. And those are the things that I'll be sharing with you, as well as some of the labs to look at and some of the red flags that will kind of give you a heads up on subclinical conditions that then you can bring to your healthcare provider. Fortunately, telehealth allows us to work with people anywhere now. So it makes it a lot easier, and we have social media. If anyone has questions at all, to say, oh, there's a provider, you know, in your state, or there isn't, but you can call, you know, this particular provider or do a telehealth situation to be able to monitor all of those variables that I just mentioned, and make sure that, because even the most well-meaning person, you know, by then I had been practicing for almost 20 years at that point, several years ago. So I thought, yeah, I've got this, but there was that one variable. And if I can do anything, it's just to give you all the variables so that you'll have those and be able to monitor them. So if something kind of goes awry, you'll have the tools to either go to your practitioner or maybe fire them if they're not doing what you need them to be able to do, and find the right one.
Yeah.
So that, you know, obviously what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else, but if it does, you have the tools, you know what to ask for. You know,
Right.
you know what all the variables are.
Yeah, yeah, that's wonderful. And how does yoga fit into this picture? Is that the, you know, we know that stress is a huge factor in this whole lifestyle equation. Is that where you use yoga, or are there other ways that yoga comes into the mix?
Yeah. Well, the way that I approach it is I take the yogic kosha model and I apply that to the World Health Organization's biopsychosocial model. It's called the ICF model. When I take the World Health Organization's model and the ancient yoga model and you bring them together to a biopsychosocial model, here are all the pieces and the parts. And then I'll shore up by telling you kind of how yoga fits in. First of all, I use that yogic biopsychosocial model to direct how I use lifestyle medicine. So under the physical, I will use nutrition, mindful movement, trauma-informed care. Under intellectual, I will discern, sometimes using Ayurvedic medicine, I'll discern how someone learns. That might include doshic assessment. I will use health coaching and health promotion and motivational techniques, which kind of feeds forward into the psycho-emotional social kosha. I'll use psychologically informed care, obviously stress management, but that might include things like cognitive behavioral therapy or motivational interviewing. In the energetic, pain science, a lot of pain science. Sleep science. Ooh, the science on sleep is just fantastic. We do cardiorespiratory screening and also intervention. And then the voice is a huge indicator of dysfunction. So just by listening to someone, you can see what's going on. I had a patient the other day, listening to her speak and seeing some of the vocal patterns she was having. We were able to connect that to pelvic floor issues and function and respiratory dysfunction. Wow. So that, bringing all that together is pretty interesting too. Yeah. So I use sound and voice analysis, and then the spiritual kind of overlaps with everything, but all the types of yoga, not the lineages or brands of yoga, because what I use is non-dogmatic. It's not associated with any lineage. But the types of yoga, jnana yoga, bhakti, karma, the yoga of sound, nada yoga, raja yoga, hatha yoga, all of those get incorporated, you know, into that model. And the way that I most commonly use yoga, past, you know, the yogic biopsychosocial model, is obviously to be congruent with the evidence base. Yoga offers nearly a complete system of lifestyle medicine in itself. Right. But it has to be complemented with a few things. Right. So for example, it's, you know, like I mentioned, I don't use lineage or brand-based yoga or, you know, kind of guru-based yoga. I use the methodology that I wrote about in my book, Medical Therapeutic Yoga, because it's not a type of yoga, it's not a lineage, it's just a method to be able to apply yoga and right. through the lens of you know, scientific evidence base, so that I can apply physical therapy, psychologically informed care, and then practice mindfulness, meditation, and then evolve postures, because maybe they've got shoulder pain, maybe they've got back pain, maybe they have a knee replacement and they've had a hip replacement. So I've got to pull all my skills in from physical therapy. And so that's, you know, where kind of medical therapeutic yoga comes in, is to pull all those things together. But yoga is an incredibly kind of thorough and comprehensive way to be able to apply lifestyle medicine.
Yeah, I think I love that model of the 5 koshas, and you know how you are using, because we usually think about yoga as yoga asana, and you know, as you point out, there's so many different types of yoga, and they work on different levels of our mind, body, spirit, the 5 koshas. So that's really a beautiful expression of just how big that and rich that body of knowledge is, and how much of it applies to our daily self-care habits that we're not even yet completely aware of, in how yoga is integrated into our daily lives.
Right.
So thank you so much, Ginger. This sounds like a completely amazing, awesome course. And
thank you. I'm very excited to be able to bring this topic
so
to everyone.
important. Yeah, and I personally myself can't wait to see, hear, integrate, you know, all of that information, because I think we're all kind of like self-care addicts in the yoga. And the more tools we can get, the better, in terms of just, you know, we have so many options for feeling our best and maximizing our trajectory over the years. And
we do. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And yoga provides a creative platform and an artistic platform within sound science here, and that's really my intention for the course. I want to apologize in advance because I have stuffed more slides into this course this time than in other courses, because I want to give you as much information as necessary. So it'll be paced well, but it'll be a lot of information, but it is just scratching the surface. So, you know, hopefully we're able to dive in deeper, or if you have, you know, people have questions, they can certainly reach out to me, but I'm really excited about presenting it.
Yeah, bring it on. I mean, we can all digest in bite-sized pieces, right?
Yeah, exactly. You'll definitely walk away with concrete things that you can do right now that puts you in control of your healthcare.
That's so great. Yeah. Well, Ginger, thank you so much for joining us today, and for giving us this fantastic glimpse into your work. And we're very much looking forward to your course.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Bye-bye.